I still remember the kind of silence that doesn't comfort you, but instead slices through the air like broken glass. It happened at my brother's wedding right when the lights shimmered across crystal glasses and the music softened. People leaned forward expecting another sweet toast. Instead, they watched me freeze in my seat as my brother's bride smiled thinly and called me a pathetic single mom. The room erupted into laughter, not the kind that warms a room, but the kind that dares you to break. My cheeks burned as if I were standing alone under a spotlight. What stung more was my mother's voice, steady but sharp, echoing into the microphone she hadn't meant to catch. She's like a discount model with a scratched label. The guests laughed harder, forks, pausing midair, eyes turning toward me as though I were some punchline. My hands trembled around a glass of water I couldn't lift without spilling. In that moment, I wasn't a 34-year-old woman who had built a life from scratch. I was 8 years old again, standing behind the garage while the neighborhood girls whispered about my worn-out shoes and secondhand dress. I glanced at my brother Liam, hoping for rescue, for even a flicker of kindness. He sat at the head table, jaw-clenched, eyes fixed on the white linen in front of him. For a second, just 1 second, his gaze flicked toward me, then darted away. That tiny twitch of guilt, that refusal to meet my eyes, hurt more than the laughter. Because this time, it wasn't strangers mocking me. It was my family, my own blood. And all because I didn't arrive wrapped in silk diamonds and perfection like Victoria, his new wife. I forced a smile, the kind that hurts to hold, while my son Ethan sat beside me clutching his napkin as though it might keep him from crying. His wide brown eyes searched my face for answers I didn't have. Then in a whisper only I could hear, he asked, "Mom, why are they laughing at you?" That question didn't just sting, it shattered something inside me. How do you explain to a 9-year-old that sometimes the people meant to love you most are the first to throw you under the bus? My throat closed, my words disappeared, and my heart sank. I wanted to grab his hand, stand up, and walk away from it all. Leave behind the golden chandeliers, the polished laughter, and the cruelty wrapped in white roses. But before I could even push my chair back, Ethan did something I'll never forget. With a quiet kind of bravery that didn't match his age, he stood. One small figure against the glow of the ballroom. Without hesitation, he began walking toward the stage. In that instant, I realized the night was no longer just about a wedding. It was about something far greater, the moment a child decided truth mattered more than silence. That morning before the ballroom lights and the cruel laughter, I stood in front of my mirror with a dress that felt both too tight and too formal. I had bought it on clearance, whispering to myself that it would do just fine. I tugged at the zipper, smoothed the fabric, and practiced smiling at my own reflection. The truth was, I wasn't dressing for me. I was dressing to prove I belonged. Ethan walked in at that exact moment, eyes shining, and said, "Mom, you look like a movie star." I smiled, even if I didn't quite believe it. Ethan's words reminded me of something we all forget: children don't measure worth in fabric labels or flawless appearances. They measure it in presence and love, in the comfort of knowing you'll still be there tomorrow. Yet society often tells single mothers like me that we are somehow less than. Less glamorous, less accomplished, less worthy of celebration. The United States is home to more than 10 million single mothers, each carrying invisible weights. And yet these women keep showing up every morning, brushing their children's hair, packing lunches, and whispering encouragement before school. Isn't that a kind of strength, too? I thought about women I'd met over the years, co-workers, neighbors, strangers in grocery store lines, who shared stories of raising children on their own. One woman, Maria, worked nights as a nurse while attending community college in the daytime. She once told me she didn't remember the last time she had 8 hours of sleep, but she remembered the way her son smiled when she attended his soccer games, no matter how tired she was. That stuck with me. Because what matters most to children isn't perfection, it's presence. And yet so often society doesn't clap for that. Standing in that little bedroom mirror, I reminded myself of Maria's story and of countless others. I told myself, "Maya, you've survived worse storms than this. Tonight is just another room." But deep down, I already knew. Family gatherings had always been my hardest test. Because unlike strangers who might whisper behind your back, family does it in front of your face and expects you to smile anyway. That morning, I looked at Ethan's proud grin and chose to swallow my fears, not for myself, but for him. He believed in me when the rest of the world seemed to forget. And that's the small lesson I carried into the day sometimes. The people who truly see us are the ones who need us the most. Children, friends, even strangers. They remind us of our value when the mirror only shows flaws. It was a truth I clung to while we drove to the wedding venue, Ethan humming softly in the back seat. He asked if Uncle Liam was nervous, and I laughed, telling him probably. I didn't say the part I was thinking, that family is scarier than any wedding vows, and I was about to learn that all over again. As I sat in the car outside the wedding venue, watching Ethan straighten his little bow tie in the mirror, my mind slipped backward to another time. I was no longer a 34-year-old mother. I was a small girl in worn sneakers standing in our backyard with my ears burning. The neighborhood kids were whispering about me, mocking the holes in my sweater, and I fought to pretend it didn't matter. What hurt wasn't their words, but the way my mother Linda glanced at me later and said, "If you dressed better, they wouldn't tease you." Even then I felt alone. That moment wasn't unique. It was a pattern. Every stumble, every failure somehow became proof that I was not enough. When my father left, Linda hardened. She poured her resentment into me as if I were a reflection of everything she'd lost. And in many American families, that's not unusual. Children often become the mirror parents can't bear to look into. Studies show that unresolved trauma is passed down not by genetics, but by words, silence, and subtle choices. I became her scapegoat, and for years I thought maybe she was right. Maybe I was too much or not enough. I think of my friend Claire, who grew up in Ohio. Her father abandoned the family when she was 9, and her mother, overwhelmed, constantly reminded her that she was just like him. Claire told me once that every report card, no matter how good, felt like a trap. She could never earn approval because her mother's pain spoke louder than her achievements. Listening to her story, I realized that so many of us walk into adulthood carrying invisible bruises. And at family events, those bruises are pressed again, like someone poking at a wound that never healed. The lesson here is a hard one. What our parents project onto us isn't always the truth about who we are. Children internalize blame that doesn't belong to them, and it follows them into adulthood, shaping their confidence, relationships, and choices. For me, every wedding toast and every holiday dinner was layered with the echo of Linda's judgment. That's why, as I zipped my dress that morning, the ghost of childhood whispered louder than the violin music waiting for me at the reception hall. It told me, "You will always be less in their eyes." But another voice, Ethan's, argued back. That inner battle is what I carried through the doors of the wedding. The scent of roses, the gleam of polished silverware, and the polite chatter could not quiet the storm already inside me. My childhood self sat beside me at that table, long before Ethan stood on stage. And the truth is, many of us do the same. We bring those invisible children into every room, even when we don't mean to. The real question, I would soon learn, was whether I would let that ghost control me forever or finally face it when the spotlight turned harsh. Walking into the reception hall felt like stepping into a magazine spread. White roses climbed tall glass vases, candlelight flickered across gold-trimmed plates, and a string quartet played so softly it almost sounded unreal. Everyone was dressed to perfection, each gown and suit carefully chosen to impress. And then there was me, tugging at the sleeves of my clearance dress, whispering to Ethan not to wrinkle his shirt. It wasn't just about clothes, it was about belonging. The room seemed designed to remind me of what I wasn't: wealthy, polished, effortlessly elegant. It was theater, and I was cast as the outsider. Victoria, my new sister-in-law, glided across the room like she owned the floor. Her pearl gown shimmered under the lights, and her smile never touched her eyes. I'd spent a year listening to her compliments laced with poison. "You're so brave to do this all on your own," or "I don't know how you manage with so little time for yourself." Every phrase was dressed like kindness, but it stripped me bare. And the truth is, toxic people rarely attack directly. They prefer polite daggers slipped between the ribs when no one else notices. That's how they maintain their perfect masks. I once met a woman at a community center who told me about her sister-in-law. "She never yells," she said, "but she destroys with her tone." At family dinners, the woman's achievements were always minimized. Her degree was cute, her job, lucky, her home small but cozy. It reminded me of Victoria because sometimes the most painful dismissals aren't loud. They're disguised as backhanded praise, leaving you unsure whether to thank someone or cry. And so many of us stay silent, laughing along because challenging the act feels like breaking the unspoken rules of the performance. The lesson, I think, is that hypocrisy flourishes in silence. Families and communities often run like theaters where everyone knows their part, who gets the applause, who plays the fool, who quietly cleans the stage. And when someone dares to disrupt the script, the entire room shifts uncomfortably. For me, that night was supposed to be about love and celebration, but instead it was about roles. Victoria, the dazzling bride, Linda, the critical matriarch, and me, the single mother, quietly expected to smile. Yet I wasn't alone. So many others know what it feels like to be written into a role they never auditioned for. As I sat at that table adjusting my heels and forcing a polite laugh, I realized how fragile the performance really was. One wrong word, one crack in the polished mask, and the entire production could collapse. And deep down, I felt it, something was about to break. I didn't yet know that Ethan's small footsteps would echo louder than any violin or toast, but I sensed the tension rising like a stage light flickering just before it bursts. And so while I smiled for the show, my heart braced itself for the unscripted act that was about to come. The laughter was still echoing when Ethan's chair scraped softly against the polished floor. At first I thought he was just shifting, maybe reaching for his napkin or heading to the bathroom. But then I saw his little frame straighten, his hands smoothing the front of his shirt, and he began walking toward the stage. My breath caught. He was only 9 years old, yet his steps carried a weight far beyond his years. Around us the chatter dimmed. Guests turned their heads, whispering, their curiosity piqued. I wanted to reach out to call him back, but my voice froze. There's something about children, they don't measure situations by etiquette or social rules, but by raw fairness. Ethan didn't think about consequences or reputations or whether it was appropriate to interrupt a wedding. He only saw his mother humiliated, and he decided silence was not an option. I once read a story about a boy in Michigan who stood up for his classmate during a school assembly when others laughed at her shoes. He shouted, "She's still smarter than all of you." That boy was disciplined for disruption, but he became her lifelong friend. Kids notice more than we think. As Ethan reached the steps leading to the microphone, my heart hammered. I whispered his name, but he didn't even glance back. That stubborn courage, so much like mine, yet braver, made me both terrified and proud. The DJ leaned down, ready to steer him away, but Liam lifted a hand. "Let him speak, my brother," said his voice tight, and suddenly the room shifted. It wasn't a wedding anymore. It was a courtroom, an audience waiting for a testimony. In that silence, Ethan's small figure looked taller than any adult in the room. He was stepping into truth's spotlight. The lesson in moments like this is clear courage doesn't wait for permission. Adults often calculate, hesitate, or swallow their words for the sake of peace. But children, when fueled by love and fairness, act without pause. That can be their gift and their burden. Ethan had nothing to gain and everything to lose: embarrassment, scolding, misunderstanding. Yet he rose anyway. And it reminded me of something I had forgotten. Sometimes bravery doesn't roar. Sometimes it walks quietly to a microphone, gripping the stand with trembling hands, refusing to let cruelty go unanswered. His silence would have been safer, but not truer. As I watched Ethan clear his throat, the entire hall hushed, as though even the roses leaned in to listen. His voice was small but steady, carrying farther than I thought possible. "I know something about the bride." Gasps rippled through the room, eyes widening, forks dropping. In that instant, I realized the fragile theater of perfection we had all been playing along with was about to collapse. The curtain was rising on an act no one had rehearsed, and I, a mother holding my breath, knew my son was about to change everything with words no one could ignore. Ethan's fingers wrapped tightly around the microphone stand, his knuckles pale under the soft glow of the chandeliers. His voice, small yet steady, broke through the silence. I heard something before the wedding. Every word seemed to echo louder than the violins that had been playing earlier. Victoria's practiced smile faltered, the mask slipping for the first time. She leaned forward, her voice coated in false sweetness. "What are you talking about, sweetheart?" But the room already leaned in, breaths caught. And my son, my 9-year-old son, stood taller, refusing to let fear take his words away. I was looking for the bathroom. Ethan continued, his eyes flicking toward me for only a moment, as if to say, "Mom, you taught me this truth matters." I walked past a room and heard the bride talking to her friend. She said she didn't really want to marry Uncle Liam. She said she needed someone stable, who wouldn't question her when she went out. A sharp gasp rippled across the hall. Forks clattered. A glass tipped over. The illusion of perfection cracked like glass, jagged and impossible to piece back together. I felt my heart slam against my ribs. Half of me wanted to run and shield him, whisper that it wasn't his burden to carry. But the other half knew this was bigger than either of us. It reminded me of a story I once read about a young girl who testified in court against a teacher who had wronged her classmates. Adults hesitated, afraid of backlash, but she spoke plainly, and because she did, the truth surfaced. Children often cut through the excuses we weave, not because they enjoy conflict, but because honesty feels as natural as breathing. The lesson, painful and powerful, is this truth, when spoken at the right moment, has the power to shift entire rooms. Adults often underestimate children, believing they don't notice, don't understand, don't feel the weight of deception. But Ethan did. And by standing there repeating words he had overheard, he reminded me and everyone else that silence allows lies to thrive. His voice shook near the end, but it carried conviction none of us could ignore. In that ballroom filled with roses and gold, his simple honesty felt like the rarest treasure. Victoria's smile hardened into a grimace, her composure cracking. "That's not true," she muttered, but no one moved to defend her. The guests shifted uneasily, their eyes bouncing between Liam and me, waiting for what would come next. Ethan's words still hung in the air, heavy as thunder before a storm. And I knew deep inside this wasn't finished. The truth had only begun to unravel, and another voice was about to join us, a voice from the past that would turn suspicion into certainty, setting the stage for what came after. For a moment the room hung in silence after Ethan's words, heavy and unyielding. Then from the back of the hall, a chair scraped against the floor. A woman stood slowly, her hands trembling, but her eyes steady. It was Rachel, an old friend of Liam's, who had drifted away once Victoria entered the picture. "I heard it too," she said, her voice quivering, yet strong enough to cut through the stunned crowd. Gasps spread again, not from shock this time, but from recognition. Suddenly Ethan's testimony wasn't a child's imagination. It was confirmed truth spoken by someone grown and credible. Rachel explained how she'd walked into the bridal suite to drop off Victoria's shoes. "She didn't see me," Rachel continued, "but I heard her say those exact words." Her tone carried no bitterness, no malice, only honesty. And that's when the shift became undeniable. Guess who had laughed at Victoria's jokes an hour earlier, now whispered uneasily, eyes darting between her and Liam. I watched my brother's face drain of color. This wasn't gossip anymore, it was testimony. And that's the power of a second voice. It transforms suspicion into evidence, turning doubt into conviction. It reminded me of something I once read about social psychology. People rarely act alone, even when they know the truth. But when one person dares to stand up, another often follows, and the tide changes. Think of the civil rights movements, where one voice sparked marches, and then thousands joined. Or even small everyday acts like a woman at a grocery store, who defends a cashier from rude customers, giving others permission to step in too. Courage multiplies. What Ethan began, Rachel carried forward, and suddenly the room no longer felt like Victoria's stage. It belonged to truth. The lesson is simple, but profound. Truth needs witnesses. Even when we know what's right, fear often chains us in silence. But when someone else speaks, it loosens those chains, reminding us we are not alone. Rachel's voice gave weight to Ethan's, but it also gave me something I hadn't realized I needed: relief. For the first time in years, someone other than my son stood beside me, not out of obligation, but because it was right. In that moment, I understood that support doesn't always come from where you expect it, but it arrives when it's most needed. Victoria's face twisted, caught between anger and panic, her words stumbling as she tried to defend herself. "This is ridiculous, just wedding day nerves," she insisted. But her denial sounded hollow now, bouncing back from walls, no longer listening. Liam's eyes glistened with hurt as he looked from Rachel to Ethan, and finally to me. He had asked Victoria 1,000 times if she truly loved him, and now the truth stared him down in front of everyone. And as his voice prepared to break, I knew the spotlight was about to turn from Rachel to Liam. His breaking point was coming. Liam stood slowly, his chair scraping across the polished floor like a sound that marked the end of pretending. His eyes darted between Victoria, Rachel, and Ethan, and finally landed on me. His voice trembled low, but sharp. "Did you really say that?" Victoria tried to laugh, a high, nervous sound that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, Liam, they're exaggerating. You know how wedding day nerves are." But the more she spoke, the more hollow her words sounded. And in that moment, I saw my brother not as a groom, but as a man cornered by the truth he had avoided. The weight of betrayal hit him visibly. His shoulders, usually relaxed, tightened, as though he was carrying a burden too heavy to bear. For years, Liam had asked Victoria if she truly loved him, and every time she reassured him with polished words and dazzling smiles. But here in front of family and friends, the mask had slipped. I thought about friends of mine who faced similar heartbreak, like Jason, a coworker, who once discovered on the eve of his engagement that his fiancée wanted his income, not his heart. Betrayal always leaves scars, but truth offers clarity. What struck me most was Liam's silence before he finally spoke again. He pressed his palms against the table, breathing slowly, as though steadying himself on uneven ground. "I don't know what's real anymore," he admitted, his voice cracking. "But I know my nephew didn't make this up, and I know my sister never deserved the way we treated her." His words pierced through me like sunlight breaking after years of cloud. For the first time in so long, my brother saw me not as a burden, not as an outsider, but as someone worth defending. The lesson in this moment was undeniable. Truth may hurt, but it also heals. Families often cling to appearances, choosing silence over honesty, even when it corrodes the bonds that once held them together. Liam's breaking point wasn't just about Victoria's lies. It was about realizing the damage caused by looking away, by allowing cruelty to go unchallenged. I've read stories about soldiers who say the hardest battles aren't fought on foreign soil, but at their own kitchen tables, confronting the silence of those who should have defended them. And I finally understood what they meant that night. Victoria tried one last desperate attempt to reclaim control, reaching for Liam's hand. But he pulled back, shaking his head. His silence was louder than her excuses. Around us, the guests shifted the atmosphere, changing from polite celebration to raw confrontation. And while Victoria's mask crumbled, something new began to take shape, a fragile bridge between Liam and me, built not from perfection, but from truth. I could feel the tide turning, not just against Victoria, but against the roles we'd all been forced into. And as she faltered, the masks around the room began to fall as well. Victoria's face tightened, her eyes darting across the room for an ally she could no longer find. She tried to laugh, but the sound cracked. "This is all a misunderstanding," she insisted, clutching her bouquet like it could shield her. But no one spoke up for her. The guests who once clapped at her jokes now stared into their drinks or whispered behind hands. One by one, the polite smiles that had covered discomfort slipped away. Hypocrisy rarely survives exposure, and in that ballroom, the masks people wore, loyal guests, supportive friends, silent bystander, began to fall faster than Victoria's excuses. Finally, she snapped. Her heels clicked harshly against the marble as she turned and stormed out, her gown trailing like a curtain closing on a failed performance. The sound of her footsteps faded, leaving a hush behind. Then unexpectedly, a single pair of hands began to clap. Slowly, others joined. The applause wasn't wild or festive. It was steady, real, meant not for the bride, but for the truth. It reminded me of a teacher once celebrated in her small town after exposing corruption, losing her job but gaining respect. Applause can be for courage, not just for ceremonies. As the clapping continued, I felt my throat tighten. Tears spilled, but they weren't just from hurt, they were from release. For years, I had carried the weight of being less than, of sitting quietly at family gatherings, while judgments circled like vultures. That night, in front of roses and chandeliers, I was finally seen. The applause wasn't only for Ethan's bravery or Rachel's honesty, or even for Liam's stand. It was a recognition that silence had ended. And recognition after years of invisibility feels like oxygen after being held underwater. It filled a part of me I thought was gone. The lesson is, these masks may protect appearances, but they suffocate authenticity. Families, communities, even whole societies often reward performance over truth, until one person refuses to play along. And when that happens, others begin to breathe easier too. I thought of a friend who confessed she finally left a toxic job after a coworker broke the silence about mistreatment. Her words gave me permission, she told me. That's what happened in that ballroom. Ethan's words gave everyone else permission to stop pretending. And the moment the pretending ended, the healing finally began. When the applause faded, the hall seemed quieter but lighter, as if the weight of secrets had lifted. Liam walked toward me, his expression raw, no longer polished or hidden. He pulled me into an embrace, whispering, "I'm sorry." And for the first time, I let myself believe him. The road ahead would not be simple, but truth had cracked open a path we could walk together. As I wiped my tears, Ethan tugged at my sleeve, and I knew the night wasn't about loss anymore. It was about redefining family, and that part was just beginning. Later that night, as the guests trickled out and the music faded, I sat in the car with Ethan. He leaned against the seat, his curls damp with sweat, his bow tie undone. "You okay, Mom?" he asked softly. For a moment I didn't answer. I just looked at him through the rearview mirror, my little boy who had carried truth on his small shoulders. "I think I am," I whispered back. And it was true. For the first time in years, I felt free because I had been seen, defended, and reminded that family is not about appearances, but about love. The night had been filled with cruelty and masks, yet it ended with courage and honesty. Ethan's bravery taught me that even the youngest voices can reshape entire rooms. Rachel's testimony reminded me that truth gains power when echoed. And Liam's breaking point showed that even silence can end if only someone dares to admit they were wrong. Each of these moments formed a chain that broke through years of shame and doubt. Looking back, I realized the story wasn't about humiliation, it was about transformation, about redefining what family meant to me. Family, I've learned, isn't always blood. It's not the ones who laugh at your pain or demand perfection to offer approval. Family is the people who see you, stand beside you, and choose you even when it's hard. That night, Ethan reminded me of this truth, just as so many single mothers across America remind their children every day. We are more than labels, more than whispered judgments. We are survivors, builders, and nurturers. And when we stop apologizing for simply existing, the world has no choice but to see our strength. The lesson is one I want to leave with you. Truth may be uncomfortable, but it sets us free. Masks may hide us, but they also suffocate. And love, the real kind, doesn't demand that we shrink ourselves to fit someone else's vision of worth. If you've ever felt less than at work, at home, at a family table, remember Ethan. Remember that one small voice can shift the atmosphere, and one act of courage can ripple farther than we imagine. If he could do it at 9, what could you do tomorrow simply by speaking the truth? If this story touched you, reminded you of your own battles, or gave you a glimpse of your own strength, I'd love for you to join me here. Click like so more people can find stories like this. Leave a comment, share a moment when you too chose courage over silence. And don't forget to subscribe, because together we can keep building a space where honesty, resilience, and love matter more than polished masks. Until next time, remember, you are enough, you are seen, and you are never as alone as you think.